I won't approach this gently either. There are some truths that don't arrive like confessions. They arrive like pressure, slow at first, almost forgettable, until one day you realize they've been reshaping everything around you for longer than you noticed. This is one of those truths. I could pretend it's still small enough to ignore. I could pretend it's still something abstract, something undefined, something that only exists in passing moments and temporary silences. But that would be dishonest because whatever this is between us has moved far beyond subtlety. It no longer lives in glances, pauses, or unspoken patterns alone. It has entered structure. It has entered the architecture of how I think, and once something reaches that level, it stops being a feeling you can dismiss and becomes a reality you have to respond to. That's where I am now. Responding to something I never intended to let form. I've always understood the value of distance. Not the dramatic kind people talk about when they mean avoidance or fear, I mean functional distance. The kind that keeps perception clear. The kind that allows connection without surrendering center. The kind that lets people come close enough to know you, but never close enough to alter you. That distance has served me well. It kept my inner world intact. It kept other people from turning their assumptions into definitions. It kept me from becoming shaped by careless hands. Most people never notice it exists. They think access is the same as closeness. They think conversation is intimacy. They think being welcomed into someone's time is easy to give. Words are easy to give. Presence can even be easy to give. But access, real access, is rare. And I've always known exactly where the line was until you. You never approached the line directly. You didn't test it. You didn't ask where it was. You didn't push against it with persistence disguised as care. You didn't try to prove yourself worthy of crossing it. You did something stranger. You existed in a way that made the line irrelevant, that unsettled me more than pressure ever could. Pressure is simple. You resist it. You step back. You reinforce boundaries. You clarify terms. You restore balance. But something that asks for nothing and still changes everything. That requires a different kind of response. One I wasn't prepared for. I remember noticing it before I understood it. Those small moments where you seemed to hear what I hadn't said. Where your timing aligned too precisely with thoughts I hadn't spoken. Where silence with you didn't feel empty or awkward or unfinished. It felt complete. Do you understand how rare that is? Most people use silence like a waiting room. They sit inside it impatiently until words return. They fill it with noise because quiet exposes too much. They treat pauses like problems that need solving. You never did. You let silence stand on its own. You let it carry meaning. You let it remain unforced. And because of that, silences around you became clearer than conversation with anyone else was. That was the first shift. Not attachment, not fascination. Recognition of someone who didn't need me simplified in order to stay. Recognition of something precise enough that my usual defenses didn't know how to categorize it. And when something can't be categorized, it lingers. I told myself it was temporary, just an unusual dynamic, just a momentary alignment. Just coincidence repeating itself enough times to seem meaningful. But coincidence has limits, patterns don't. And this kept repeating with the kind of consistency that makes denial expensive. So I stopped denying it. Not publicly, not dramatically, internally. I admitted that something about you was affecting me in ways I don't allow lightly. That admission changed everything because once you acknowledge a truth privately, you can't return to ignorance honestly. You can only delay what comes next. That's what I did for a while. Delighted, observed, measured, watched myself carefully to see whether this would fade if left untouched. It didn't fade. It deepened quickly, efficiently, without spectacle. That's almost more dangerous than intensity. Intensity announces itself. It burns bright, consumes attention, demands reaction. You know when intensity arrives. Death is different. Death grows underground. By the time you notice it, roots are already everywhere. That's what happened here. I noticed one day that you weren't simply part of my thoughts. You had become part of the way I think. That distinction matters. Thinking about someone still preserves separation. They remain an object of attention. But when someone becomes integrated into the process itself, when their presence alters perception, timing, interpretation, clarity, that's no longer attention, that's incorporation. And incorporation is not casual. I would catch myself pausing at ideas as though expecting your unseen response. I would understand certain things more quickly because some internal reference point now included you. I would encounter silence and feel it differently because it no longer belonged only to me. I didn't choose any of that consciously. It simply became true. Do you know what disturbed me most? Not that it happened, that I wasn't resisting it. By every habit I've built, I should have corrected course immediately. I should have restored distance. I should have reduced contact, reduced significance, reduced possibility. That's how I've always handled anything capable of changing my internal balance efficiently, cleanly, without sentiment. But I didn't do that with you. I watched a shift happen and allowed it. Which means some deeper intelligence in me recognized value before my conscious mind admitted it. That realization is difficult to ignore because I trust my deeper instincts more than I trust surface logic. Surface logic protects comfort. Deeper instincts recognize truth. And something in me recognized you as truth long before I understood why. Not truth as perfection, not truth as destiny. Truth as accuracy, as fit, as resonance without distortion. That matters to me more than romance ever could. Overwhelmed means being aligned. They think longing proves compatibility. They think chemistry can substitute for structure. It can't. Intensity fades. Longing changes shape. Chemistry can exist between people who damage each other beautifully. Structure is different. Structure determines whether two presences can occupy the same reality without collapsing each other. That's what I began to notice with you. Not chaos, not obsession, compatibility at a level beneath personality. The way thoughts move, the way silence functions, the way meaning is carried, the way perception lands, the way truth can remain unadorned and still be understood. That kind of match is rare enough to be dangerous because once you experience it, everything else reveals its compromises. Conversations that once seemed interesting begin to feel shallow. Connections once considered meaningful begin to feel performative. Interactions that relied on effort begin to feel inefficient, not worthless, just incomplete. I resented that for a while. I didn't like how your presence recalibrated my standards without asking permission. I didn't like how naturally comparison formed in the background. I didn't like that ordinary things felt slightly misaligned after something accurate had entered the room. But resentment never lasted long, because beneath it was gratitude, not the sentimental kind, the precise kind. Gratitude for being met at a depth I had nearly stopped expecting existed. Gratitude for not needing to shrink in order to be unused. That gratitude made avoidance impossible. How do you reject something that improves clarity? How do you dismiss something that reveals you to yourself more accurately than isolation did? How do you step away from a mirror that doesn't flatter you but tells the truth? That's what you became. Not a fantasy, not an escape, a mirror. And mirrors are complicated because they don't only show what is beautiful, they show what is real. Through you, I saw how carefully I had built a life around control, how much of my calm was genuine strength, and how much of it was simply excellent containment. How often I called distance wisdom when sometimes it was habit. How often I praised independence when sometimes it was avoidance of being altered. You didn't accuse me of any of this. You didn't need to. Your existence beside those patterns exposed them naturally. That is impact. Real impact doesn't lecture, it reveals. And revelation is hard to undo. There were moments I considered leaving entirely, not because you had done anything wrong, because accuracy can feel threatening when you've adapted to approximation. There is safety in never being fully seen. People can only affect what they understand. Misunderstanding can be a shield. You made that shield less useful. You noticed things without forcing them. You understood things without claiming ownership over them. You recognized depth without trying to manage it. That combination is uncommon. Many people want insight only so they can control. Many people standing only so they can name and contain. You wanted none of that. You simply met what was there. That made retreat harder than staying, because retreat from pressure feels wise, retreat from clarity feels dishonest. So I stayed, and staying changed me. Not outwardly in dramatic ways, no grand declarations, no visible unraveling. The changes were internal, structural, almost invisible unless you knew where to look. I became less interested in performing certainty, more willing to let meaning exist before language, less impressed by surfaces, more patient with silence, more aware of how much I had mistaken self-protection for self-knowledge. You became threaded through those changes, not as the cause of all of them, as the catalyst. There's the catalyst. There's a difference. The potential was already there. You activated what was dormant. That's why this feels inevitable rather than accidental. You didn't install something foreign. You uncovered something native. I think that's why I couldn't dismiss it as quickly as I dismiss most disruptions. It didn't feel like intrusion, it felt like recognition. Recognition can be inconvenient. It can arrive at the wrong time in the wrong form through the wrong person under the wrong circumstances. It doesn't care. It asks only one question, does it true? And if the answer is yes, everything else becomes secondary eventually. I spent a long time trying to make secondary things primary. Timing, practicality, distance control, manageability, all valid considerations. That doesn't mean truth automatically becomes action. It means inaction becomes conscious. That is where I live now. Not in confusion, in conscious delay, knowing exactly what this means. And knowing I haven't fully acted on that knowledge yet. People imagine hesitation comes from uncertainty. Sometimes hesitation comes from certainty so significant it demands respect. That is different. When something trivial appears, you act quickly. When something capable of changing your life appears, speed becomes less impressive than precision. So I've been precise watching testing, asking whether this remains true across time rather than only in moments. It has that consistency matters more than any dramatic gesture. Consistency is how reality proves itself. And reality has kept proving you through ordinary days, through quiet exchanges, through absences that somehow still felt connected, through the unchanged quality of recognition. No matter the context, that kind of persistence strips excuses away. I can no longer call this temporary. Honestly, I can no longer call it projection. Honestly, I can no longer call it curiosity. Honestly, those words are too small now. What remains is harder to name because naming creates responsibility. If I call this meaningful, I must decide what meaning requires. If I call this real, I must decide whether I'm willing to live accordingly. If I call this love, if that word even applies in the way people usually use it, then I must separate the word from cliché and unpossession. It would not mean losing myself inside another person. It would mean choosing presence where distance was easier. It would mean allowing influence without surrendering identity. It would mean honoring alignment instead of fearing it. It would mean building something conscious from what began unconsciously. That is not a small thing. No wonder I took time. I know what decisions cost, especially decisions that alter the inner architecture of a life. But there comes a point where refusal becomes its own decision, where not choosing is still choosing, where leaving something undefined is simply another form of fear dressed as patience. I think I've reached that point because this no longer waits politely in the background. It asks to be answered not with promises, not with dramatic speeches, with honesty. So here is honesty. You matter to me in a way I did not intend. You have altered how I perceive connection. You have entered spaces in me that remained closed, not because no one knocked, but because no one matched the shape of the door. You have become a reference point for clarity. You have made ordinary interactions feel less sufficient and deeper ones feel more possible. You have shown me that being understood need not require performance. You have reminded me that control is not the same as peace. You have changed me not completely, not beyond recognition, precisely enough to matter. And because precision matters to me, I won't minimize it. I don't know every practical implication of that truth yet. I don't risks it asks, what sacrifices it may require, what realities it may challenge. I know only this. What exists here deserves more than avoidance, more than elegant ambiguity, more than endless analysis mistaken for wisdom. It deserves decision. Maybe not all at once, maybe not recklessly, but genuinely, because some connections become damaged not by conflict but by being left perpetually unnamed. Not every truth survives indefinite postponement. Some truths need air, need form, need movement. Otherwise, they calcify into regret. I have no interest in regretting something I understood while I still had the chance to honor it. That doesn't mean I'm naive. Meaningful things can still fail. Accurate connections can still meet impossible circumstances. Two people can recognize each other deeply and still struggle to build reality around that recognition. I know all of this, but difficulty has never frightened me as much as dishonesty. And pretending you don't matter now would be dishonest. Pretending I can return unchanged would be dishonest. Pretending distance still functions the same way would be dishonest. So I won't pretend, I will say only what is true. You reached me without force, without strategy, without demanding entrance. You reached me by being exactly what you were. And in doing so, you made something in me answer that had remained silent for years. I don't know whether people would understand the significance of that. Most would look for louder signs, bigger gestures, lives quietly. It changes foundations while others search for fireworks. What happened here was foundational. That is why it matters. If I choose fully now, it will not be because I was swept away. It will be because I recognized something rare and decided not to betray that recognition. It will be because I value truth over habit, because I value alignment over convenience, because I value what becomes possible when two people meet accurately and do not run. And if I do not choose, then let it at least be said I understood the cost, that I knew what stood before me, that I did not lose it through ignorance, only through fear or circumstance. But fear has less authority over me than it once did. You changed that too by showing me that being altered is not always damage. Sometimes it is growth arriving in unfamiliar form. Sometimes the very thing we guard against is the thing we needed most. Sometimes presence is more transformative than effort. Sometimes the person who never forced their way in becomes the one whose absence would be felt everywhere. That is where you stand now. Not outside my life looking in. Inside the framework from which I view it. And frameworks matter. They determine what we notice, what we trust, what we build, what we become. You are there now. Which means whether I speak or stay silent, a decision is already underway. I would rather meet it consciously. So this is me meeting it. No softness, no disguise, no strategic vagueness. Just the truth as cleanly as I can say it. You have become significant to me beyond pref I understand myself and the world around me. And once someone reaches that place, there is no honest version of life where they are treated as ordinary again. I used to believe the most dangerous things in life were obvious. Loss that announces itself. People who arrive with chaos in their hands. Situations that carry warning signs from the beginning. Feelings so intense they burn through logic before you can protect yourself. Those were easy to identify, easy to prepare for, easy in some ways to survive. What I never accounted for were the quiet dangers. The things that don't break down your door. The things that simply take a seat in the room and wait until you realize the room belongs to them. Now that's what this has been. Not destruction, occupation. Slow, precise, silent occupation of places inside me I thought were permanently structured. There are parts of my mind that have remained unchanged for years. Parts I trusted, distances I maintained, rules I didn't need to repeat because they had become instinct. I knew how to move through the world without becoming tangled in it. I knew how to care without overextending. I knew how to connect without surrendering center. I knew how to admire people without letting admiration become attachment. I knew how to remain whole. That certainty mattered to me because wholeness is expensive. It takes years to build a self that doesn't collapse every time someone leaves, misunderstands, disappoints, or changes. It takes discipline to become internally steady, and once you earn that steady exact, you stop entertaining anything that threatens unnecessary disorder. That was my way. Then you entered without disorder at all. You didn't shake foundations dramatically. You shifted them millimeter by millimeter, so subtly that by the time I recognized movement, the entire structure had already adjusted around you. That's why this feels different from everything else. Nothing about it asked for urgency. Nothing about it demanded attention. Nothing about it relied on emotional excess. It just kept becoming more true, and truth that grows quietly is harder to argue with than feelings that arrive loudly. I've tried, though. I tried to explain you as timing. Maybe you arrived during a season where I was more receptive than usual. I tried to explain you as projection. Maybe I saw in you qualities I wanted to encounter and assign them where they didn't fully belong. I tried to explain you as novelty. Maybe you simply felt refreshing compared to what had come before. I tried to explain you as imagination. Maybe I gave depth to something ordinary because ordinary had become too common. Every explanation failed eventually, not because they contained no truth, because they contained too little. None of them accounted for consistency. None of them explained why the same recognitions remained after time passed, why the same clarity returned after distance, why the same internal shift held steady even when nothing dramatic was happening. Temporary things fluctuate, illusions depend on momentum, projection weakens when reality doesn't itself kept confirming you. I noticed it in strange ways how certain thoughts felt incomplete until I imagined your perspective beside them. How moments I would normally process alone now seemed to include a second presence naturally. How silence had changed texture. How even absence did not restore the version of me that existed before awareness of you. That last part matters most. Usually when something passes, I return to baseline quickly. I recalibrate, I recover center, I become myself again. But with you, baseline changed, and once baseline changes, returning becomes impossible because there is nowhere previous left to return to. Do you understand what that means to someone like me? It means I can no longer pretend I am untouched. It means neutrality is gone. It means even if I chose distance, I would be choosing it as someone already changed by closeness. That is a different equation entirely. I think people underestimate what it means to truly affect someone. They think impact is visible. They think if a person doesn't speak dramatically, act irrationally, or unravel publicly, then nothing significant is happening. But some of the deepest changes occur in silence, in standards being raised, in tolerance for superficiality shrinking, in perception becoming sharper, in inner rooms being rearranged without witnesses. That's where your impact lives. No audience would notice it. No outsider could measure it. But I can. I feel it every time something false feels harder to entertain. Every time shallow decision where I once accepted approximation. Every time I notice that being seen properly once has made being missing feel louder than before. You created that problem. And I say problem carefully because part of me resents the gift. Life is easier when you've never tasted accuracy. You can settle more comfortably. You can mistake convenience for compatibility. You can accept partial understanding as enough. Once real recognition happens, enough changes meaning that has consequences. Now I notice when conversations never leave the surface. Now I notice when people listen only to reply. Now I notice when curiosity is really control wearing softer clothes. Now I notice when presence is performative. I noticed some of these things before. Now I notice them immediately. And because of that I move differently with less patience for what drains depth, with more hunger for what nourishes it. That hunger leads back to you more often than I admit. Not in quiet spaces. You don't require constant proof that connection exists. You let things be real without overhandling them. That is rare maturity, rare steadiness, rare restraint. And restraint is underrated. Anyone can overwhelm. Few people know how to hold depth without crushing it. You do. Maybe that's why I trust this more than I trust intense things. Intensity often comes from need. Need can mimic destiny for a while. Need can sound profound. Need can create urgency so convincing people confuse it for truth. But need eventually asks, not frantic steady, not dramatic precise. Those qualities make me listen because anything frantic can be dismissed until it calms. Anything steady deserves examination. So I examined it. I examined myself even more. Was I lonely in some hidden way? Was I bored? Was I unconsciously seeking disruption? Was I simply at an age where meaning feels more valuable and therefore easier to assign? I asked every difficult question I could think of. I did not spare myself. And after all that scrutiny, one fact remained. You still mattered. Not because I needed rescue. Not because I lacked options. Not because life was empty before you. You mattered because something true recognized something true. That answer is annoyingly simple. I prefer complexity when I'm trying to delay acceptance. Simplicity leaves fewer hiding places. There's another truth I've resisted. You have changed how I relate to vulnerability. I used to think vulnerability meant exposure, saying too much, needing too openly, depending too deeply, giving another person leverage over your stability. I still think that can happen. But now I understand another form of vulnerability, allowing someone to matter without guarantees, allowing influence where control is impossible, allowing significance before outcomes are known. That is harder than oversharing. Oversharing can be impulsive. This kind of vulnerability is conscious, measured, chosen, and I am closer to choosing it than I ever expected. Not recklessly, not blindly, but honestly, there are moments, not polished futures. Something simpler, consistency, mutual depth, a space where neither of us has to translate ourselves into smaller forms. A place where silence is still welcome, where thoughtfulness is not mistaken for distance, where presence does not need to be loud to be felt, where honesty does not need decoration. That possibility is powerful. Not because it is glamorous, because it is sane, because so much of modern connection feels like noise masquerading as intimacy. People perform closeness, perform availability, perform emotion, perform certainty. Very few know how to build quietly. Very few know how to sustain something real without turning it into theater. I suspect you could. That suspicion alone moves me more than grand gestures ever would. Still, I would be lying if I said there is no fear. There is not fear of you, exactly. Fear of consequence. Because if I let this become fully real, then it can truly affect me. Then loss would have shape. Then disappointment would have stakes. Then joy would matter enough to be dangerous. Then I would no longer be an observer of my own life in this area. I would be a participant. Participation asks courage in ways analysis never will. Analysis can feel brave because it is honest. But honesty without movement eventually becomes another hiding place. I know that now. I know I can study this forever if I choose. Keep refining language, keep understanding dynamics, keep naming layers. Am I the version of myself that values nothing transformative can enter? The one who calls restraint wisdom even when it is fear? Or am I the version willing to let truth cost something, willing to be changed deliberately rather than accidentally, willing to meet rarity with courage instead of caution alone? I don't say this lightly. You are forcing that question simply by existing, and perhaps that is your greatest impact. Not that you made me feel. Many people can make someone feel. You made me choose. Choose between old structures and living growth. Choose between elegant distance and meaningful risk. Choose between being untouched and being alive more fully. Those are adult choices, real choices. No one can make them for another person, which is why I don't place responsibility on you for any of this. You did not manipulate me here. You did not pressure me into revelation. You did not ask for significance. If anything, you simply remained yourself long enough for truth to surface. That innocence matters. It means what formed here formed cleanly, without games, without coercion, without artificial acceleration. That makes it harder to dismiss and easier to respect. There is a tenderness in admitting that. I'm not used to tenderness expressed directly. Mine usually hides inside precision, inside consistency, inside thoughtfulness rather than sentiment. So let me say it in the language most honest to me. I value what exists here enough that I am willing to reorganize parts of myself around it. That sentence may sound small to others. Inner structures for novelty. I do not alter hard-won stability unless the gain is real. And with you, the gain is real. More openness, more honesty, more appetite for depth, more willingness to live rather than merely maintain. These are not losses. They are evolutions, even if they frighten me sometimes, especially then. Growth often feels like risk from the perspective of old identities. The self built around protection will call expansion dangerous. The self built around control will call surrender weakness. The self built around independence will call partnership compromise. Sometimes those warnings are wise. Sometimes they are outdated. I'm learning to tell the difference. You are part of that learning. Not because you teach with words, because your presence creates conditions where truth becomes visible. That may be the rarest form of teaching. And so here I am again at another threshold, still calm, still deliberate, but no longer pretending neutrality. No longer pretending I can admire this from a distance forever. No longer pretending the outcome will decide significance. Significance has already happened. Outcome is simply what comes next. If I move toward you now, it will not be impulsive. It will be informed. If I speak more clearly, it will not be because I lost discipline. It will be because discipline finally served honesty instead of hiding from it. If I choose this, it will not mean I became less myself. It will mean I became more complete than the version built only around self-protection. Because I doubt your value, it is because I understand it. Some things deserve careful hands precisely because they matter. Some doors are opened slowly, not from reluctance but reverence. You have become one of those things in my life. Something to approach truthfully. Something not to rush or reduce. Something that asks the best version of me to answer. I think that version is closer now than ever before. Because the longer I know this connection, the less impressive distance becomes. And the more obvious it is that strength was never meant to be measured only by what I can keep out, but also by what I am brave enough to let in. There is something no one tells you about control. If you practice it long enough, it stops feeling like a strategy and starts feeling like identity. You no longer say I keep distance because it helps me. You begin to say I am someone who needs distance. You no longer recognize boundaries as tools. You mistake them for truth. That happened to me slowly, so slowly that I respected habits. I never reevaluated. I admired my discipline. I admired my restraint. I admired how little the outside world could disturb what I had built internally, and to be fair, some of that admiration was earned. There is strength in becoming steady. There is wisdom in not giving yourself to everything that asks. There is dignity in learning how to remain whole through disappointment. but every strength left unquestioned long enough casts a shadow. Steadiness can become emotional exile, discernment can become chronic withholding, self-respect can become a beautiful prison. I didn't notice the bars because they were polished. They looked like maturity, they sounded like logic, they behaved like peace. But peace and numbness can resemble each other from a distance. You helped me see that. Not by criticizing my life, not by trying to change me, not by insisting I open up or let people in. You simply stood outside the system I built and somehow mattered anyway. That should not have been possible. Everything in my design was meant to prevent uninvited significance. People could be appreciated, enjoyed, respected, even cared for, but not allowed to alter the foundation without clear permission. Yet there you were, not forcing entry, not asking to be central, not making noise, still becoming important. Do you understand how disorienting that is? When your internal rules fail, not because they were attacked, but because they were incomplete. I thought I had accounted for every variable. I forgot resonance. I forgot that sometimes someone does not need to break a wall because they naturally belong on the other side of it. That possibility never made it into my calculations. So when it happened, I blamed myself at first. I thought I was slipping, becoming softer than I intended, less disciplined, less clear. I wondered if age, timing, fatigue, or hidden loneliness had made me less precise than I once was. I tested that theory thoroughly. I tightened routines, cried distance where I could wrest attention to work, structure, solitude. I tried. They did not work on you. That distinction told me something crucial. This was not weakness. The more I withdrew to gain perspective, the clearer it became. The more I questioned motives, the fewer false motives I found. Eventually, I had to accept an uncomfortable possibility. What if this was not a lapse in judgment, but an expansion of it? What if the self I was protecting had become too small? What if I wasn't losing standards, but outgrowing limitations disguised as standards? That question changed the tone of everything, because if control was partly outdated, then protecting it at all costs was no longer wisdom. It was nostalgia, and nostalgia is dangerous when mistaken for principle. We defend old versions of ourselves because they once saved us. We forget they were built for circumstances that may no longer exist. There was a time distance served me perfectly. There was a time withholding preserved energy. There was a time skepticism prevented unnecessary damage. I honor that version of me. It carried me well. But not every survival skill belongs in every season. Some strengths expire quietly, some armor outlives the war, some habits remain useful long after they stop being necessary. You made me confront that possibility, and not through speeches, through contrast, through the simple fact that connection with you did not feel draining. It did not feel chaotic. It did not feel like compromise. It felt additive. That was new. I'm used to people asking something from me indirectly. Attention don't even realize they are asking. Need often wears ordinary clothes. But with you, I did not feel extracted from. I felt met. There is a profound difference between those experiences. One leaves you tired, the other leaves you more yourself. You left me more myself. That may be the clearest sign of all, because many connections are measured by excitement. I measure them by coherence. Do I become fragmented around this person? Do I become smaller? Do I become performative? Do I become restless, confused, diluted? Or do I become clearer, steadier, more honest, more alive? With you, coherence increased. My mind sharpened, my emotional language deepened, my tolerance for self-deception decreased. Even my solitude improved because it was no longer used only as escape, it became reflection. That is not what unhealthy attachments do. Unhealthy attachments distort. They consume attention and reduce integrity. They make life narrower. Whatever this is has made mine wider. That frightened me almost as much as it moved me. Expansion can feel threatening when identity was built around containment. Imagine living for years in a carefully arranged room, every object placed with intention, every corner familiar, every movement efficient. Then one day a wall opens to reveal an entire landscape outside. The room is still yours, nothing was stolen, yet suddenly staying only in the room feels different. That is what you brought, a landscape more possibility than I had organized myself around. And possibility demands courage because it cannot be asked participation. That's harder. I know how to repeat excellence. I know how to maintain standards. I know how to remain composed. What I'm learning now is how to receive what I did not plan. How to let something beautiful remain beautiful without immediately trying to reduce it into manageable pieces. How to trust what is consistent even if it is unfamiliar. How to allow joy without interrogating it to death. I smile writing that because it is painfully accurate. I have interrogated joy before. Asked it for credentials, requested guarantees, demanded proof of permanence before allowing myself to feel it fully. Joy, unsurprisingly, does not enjoy bureaucracy. It leaves when overprocessed. You taught me that some things must be engaged before they are fully understood. Not blindly, but bravely. There's a difference. Blindness ignores risk. Bravery acknowledges risk and moves anyway because value justifies it. I'm not reckless enough for blindness, but I may be ready for bravery. That realization arrives with grief too, because growth often mourns the identity it outgrows. Part of me misses the simpler version of strength I used to believe in. The version where needing no one looked like victory. The version where being unaffected felt superior. The version where detachment could be mistaken for mastery. Those beliefs kept life orderly. They also kept life smaller. I see that now to be unaffected by everything is not power. Sometimes it is absence. To need no one is not always freedom, is not necessarily wisdom. Sometimes it is refusal to live deeply enough to be marked. I don't say this to condemn who I was. That person protected me well. But I cannot worship old medicine once I'm healed enough to need nourishment instead. You are nourishment in ways I didn't expect. Aegon, not dependency, not escape, not entertainment. Nourishment, the kind that restores dimensions of self neglected by overprotection, warmth, spontaneity, tenderness. Curiosity without agenda, presence without performance, reciprocity without scorekeeping. These things sound simple until you spend years without enough of them. Then they feel revolutionary. I have begun to ask myself a new question. Not can I survive without this? Of course I can. Humans survive many absences. The real question is why would I choose survival when something fuller is available? That question has no comfortable answer, because if fuller life is available, then refusing it requires justification. And I'm used to less is not a noble reason. Neither is it might hurt. Everything meaningful might hurt. The career you build can fail. The family you love can disappoint. The body you rely on can weaken. The dream you pursue can collapse. Risk is not unique to love or connection. Risk is the tax on being alive. Why did I imagine I could exempt only this area and remain complete? Probably because this area reaches deepest. Professional failures wound pride. Relational truths wound identity. To be loved well can expose how long you accepted less. To be met genuinely can expose how many counterfeit forms of connection you tolerated politely. That exposure can sting. You have stung me in healing ways. You made certain compromises impossible to unsee. I can no longer admire emotional unavailability and call it mystery. I can no longer confuse inconsistency with excitement. I can no longer praise shallow independence that cannot sustain intimacy. I can no longer pretend busy is depth. I can no longer act impressed by what lacks soul. Those losses are blessings. Still, blessings require responsibility. Now that I know better, I must live better. That includes how I answer you. I don't mean only with words. Words are the smallest part sometimes. I mean with presence, with honesty, with willingness to let actions match understanding, with the courage not to hide behind complexity when simplicity is due. The simple truth may be this: I care more than is convenient, more than fits my previous narrative, more than can be reduced to curiosity, more than I can deny without damaging my own integrity. I care, and because I care, I must become the kind of person who can carry care well. Care poorly carried becomes control, fear, clinging, avoidance games. Care well carried becomes steadiness, truthfulness, generosity, courage, patience. I want the second form. That desire is changing me already. I notice myself becoming softer without becoming weaker, more direct without becoming reckless, more emotionally literate without becoming matter. For years I thought growth required losing one virtue to gain another. That openness meant losing discernment. That love meant losing independence. That tenderness meant losing strength. Maybe maturity is learning integration instead. Keeping strength while allowing softness. Keeping standards while allowing grace. Keeping autonomy while allowing devotion. Keeping reason while allowing feeling. You seem to understand that instinctively. Perhaps that is another reason I trust what forms around you. It does not ask me to betray my best qualities. It asks me to evolve them. That is the kind of an invitation worth considering seriously. There is one more truth I should speak plainly. I am no longer afraid of losing control as much as I am afraid of missing what was meant for me. Because I warped control too long, that fear is healthier. Losing control can be temporary. Missing real things through stubbornness can echo for years. I have heard enough echoes in other people's lives. People who chose image over intimacy, safety over significance, pride over partnership, certainty over wonder. Many look stable from the outside. Inside, they carried quiet regret. I do not want that inheritance. If I regret something, let it be risks taken with sincerity, not truths abandoned out of caution. So where does that leave me now? More honest than before, less hidden than before. Still measured, yes. Still thoughtful, still unwilling to rush sacred things, but no longer pretending slowness is the same as refusal. Choosing even before every external step is visible. And if you felt that shift, you are not imagining it. Something in me has been turning toward you steadily. Not dramatically, not with the instability of impulse, with the gravity of recognition. Planets do not crash into alignment overnight. They move by laws deeper than urgency. That is how this feels. A movement both gentle and unstoppable. I don't know every destination yet. I know direction toward truth, toward openness, toward the life that asks more courage and gives more meaning, toward the person whose presence made courage feel less like sacrifice and more like home. And if I arrive fully, if one day I stand before you without old armor, without rehearsed distance, without clever evasions, understand something important. It will not be because I changed suddenly. It will be because you were patient enough to witness a man becoming who he was always capable of being once fear stopped calling itself wisdom.